This story was sent by a girl named Emily who lived a terrifying experience with her mother. As a child, Emily was known for her timidity, always keeping her bedroom door open and fearing the dark. Yet, what truly marked her young mind were her mother's prolonged illnesses, worsened by her weak immune system. One night, when Emily was about 7 or 8, she settled into bed as usual. In the dead of night, she woke abruptly, a chilling sense of unease gripping her, as if unseen eyes were fixed upon her. At first, she brushed it off, chalking it up to fatigue and her vivid imagination. But the next night, the unsettling feeling returned, intensified by the sight of her closet door slightly ajar. Emily distinctly remembered securely closing it before bed. Fear gripped her, and she hurried to her mother's room, her heart pounding with dread. Her mother comforted her, suggesting the door might have opened due to uneven floorboards. Emily sought solace beside her mother for the rest of the night. Despite her mother's reassurances, the following night found Emily back in her own bed, only to awaken once more to eerie sounds emanating from the closet. It was her toys, their voices distorted and disjointed. Fear consumed Emily as she realized the toys only activated when their buttons were pressed buttons she hadn't touched. She cried out in terror until her mother rushed in, soothing her frayed nerves and bringing her back to her own bed, assuring her it was merely a bad dream. Several nights passed with Emily sleeping beside her mother, seeking solace from the persistent unease. Eventually, Emily's mother insisted she return to her own room. That night, Emily lay wide awake, her nerves on edge, anticipating something unsettling. Just as she felt herself drifting toward sleep, a chilling creak echoed through the room, the unmistakable sound of her closet door slowly opening. A sudden, icy coldness enveloped the room, paralyzing her with fear. Emily's gaze fixed on the closet, where she could make out two eerie sets of eyes staring back at her. Terror surged through her, and she let out a scream that pierced the silence of the night. Hearing her daughter's cry, Emily's mother burst into the room, alarmed and anxious. "What's wrong?" she asked urgently. Still trembling, Emily managed to stammer, "There's someone in my closet." Her mother, mixing concern with a hint of disbelief, approached the closet and swung the door open, only to find it empty. Despite this reassurance, Emily's fear lingered, prompting her to seek solace in her mother's room for the next 2 weeks. After those 2 weeks, Emily dared to hope it was all over. She finally settled into her own bed, trying to push the lingering fear aside. But one night, she was startled awake by whispers echoing in the darkness, ominous and unsettling. Her closet shook violently, as if caught in a storm, before abruptly falling silent. The night light flickered and extinguished, plunging her room into oppressive darkness once more. Then came the dreaded sound, the slow, eerie creak of the closet door opening. Emily lay frozen with fear, watching as eyes emerged from the shadows, inching closer towards her. Just as the terror threatened to overwhelm her, she heard the comforting sound of her mother's footsteps approaching. With palpable relief, her mother entered the room, immediately sensing the unusual chill and the absence of the nightlight that Emily always kept on. Concern etched on her face, she gently questioned Emily, who, trembling, disclosed that it had turned off the light, a sinister act intended to harm her. Alarmed by her daughter's ordeal, Emily's mother wasted no time in seeking help from a priest, recounting the terrifying events they had experienced. The priest's grave assessment confirmed their worst fears: a malevolent spirit or demon was actively targeting Emily, with the intent to possess her. A few days later, a priest visited Emily's home to perform a blessing. After the priest completed his rites, things seemed to return to normal. However, something deeply unsettling happened just before the priest arrived. Emily's mother, too, had an encounter. She recounted waking up one night, shivering with cold and struggling to breathe. To her horror, she saw the same apparition that Emily had described, a shadowy presence hovering over her, attempting to possess her. This terrifying experience left her feeling weak and exhausted. After the house was blessed, Emily and her mother no longer saw the dark presence. But years later, Emily noticed something peculiar. New ghosts had appeared. Unlike the sinister entity before, these spirits didn't try to harm her. They simply watched, their presence a silent, constant reminder of the otherworldly encounter that once haunted their home. This is what happened to Jack after one night he decided to start using the Ouija board. Jack tells us in his story that throughout his life, he had always faced spooky and inexplicable events, and he had always believed in the paranormal. But what ultimately made him stop searching for the supernatural was an experience he fervently hoped never to face again. It might not have been so unsettling if it hadn't happened in his own home, where he lived with his wife, Emily, his sister-in-law, Rachel, and his young son, Liam. So, let's dive into the story. Jack, driven by a mix of curiosity and fascination, decided to buy an Ouija board. The strange happenings in their house started out subtly enough, a few noises here and there, objects shifting inexplicably, and even cups being hurled off flat surfaces with no one around. One particularly unsettling incident occurred when Liam, who was then too young to speak and had just begun reaching for things, walked over to a corner in the bathroom by the washing machine. He started reaching out for someone or something invisible in that corner. Jack, thoroughly spooked, scooped up his son and dashed out of the room. And this, mind you, was before the Ouija board entered their lives. Then Jack began using the Ouija board regularly, and every time, he communicated with a spirit that called itself Max. Intrigued by these interactions, Jack decided to dig deeper and looked up the state's death records. He discovered a girl named Maxine Lewis, who had died in a car crash in the very same county he lived in. As Jack recounts this, he mentions that his lights flickered, a reminder of the eerie events that used to unfold in his home. He also notes that ever since he saged the house, those disturbances had ceased. Interestingly, all the information Max provided matched up with this girl, except for one detail. Max claimed to be 6 years old, while the records indicated Maxine was 9. Jack speculated that perhaps, to a child looking at the Ouija board from the opposite side, a 6 might resemble a 9. But this wasn't even the part that truly terrified him. Objects around the house would move from one place to another whenever Jack turned his back. On the front porch, they had a small chair for Liam, which usually sat next to the house, facing the road. However, on some days, Jack would return home to find this chair inexplicably facing the front door. He initially dismissed it, thinking that his in-laws, who frequently visited, might have moved it. No big deal, he thought, and would just move it back. One afternoon, Jack and Rachel were alone at home. He had returned just 30 minutes before and found the chair in its usual place. As he walked through the living room towards the hallway, he heard a noise coming from the porch. He was just a couple of feet from the window that overlooked the spot where the chair sat. When he looked outside, he saw no one. Remember, the front door was only about 7 to 8 feet from that window. Jack ran to the door, flung it open, and saw the chair had moved again, this time facing the door. He was so startled that he yelled for Rachel. She came out of the kitchen into the hallway, saw the chair, and freaked out as well. She had no idea that Jack had been coming home to this unsettling scene until he explained it to her after the fact. Yet, this wasn't the most chilling part of the story. One night, Jack found himself alone in the house. In a bid to rationalize the bizarre occurrences and ease their minds, they had decided to get a pet pig, thinking they could attribute the strange happenings to the pig's mischief. They even installed baby gates at both entrances to the living room to keep the pig from wandering into the rest of the house. So, on this particular night, it was just Jack and the pig. Everyone else was out for the evening, and Jack was relishing some gaming time with his friends. He was having a great time when he suddenly felt an unsettling sensation, as though he was being watched. He turned around and saw a girl pale white, not transparent, with long black hair and pitch black eyes peeking around the doorway, reaching for the baby gate. She instantly darted away. Jack screamed no, at the top of his lungs. His friends, hearing his panic through the headset, assumed he was being robbed. Jack frantically told one of them to come over immediately. He remained glued to the TV, keeping a vigilant eye on both entrances to the living room until his friend arrived. The very next day, Jack saged the house, determined never to play the Ouija board in his home again. If he ever did decide to use it, he vowed to sage himself and the house every single time. Jack mentions that those were just some of the disturbing events that occurred in his house. But there was so much more that Jack didn't even want to mention, since telling every detail would have been overwhelming for him. And what do you think about what happened to Jack? Has any paranormal experience happened to you that you want to share to be narrated on our channel?